Yes, that was another camera coming in for service. This can go on the top of the camera body. That's our film rewind in place. The shutter release. Now, the shutter release is entertaining because there's a small spacer washer. I've left something out of that film advance. We need to put that back in place first. Let's do that and then do my shutter release after that. Just check I've got everything there. Now the ratchet's missing from here. I didn't put the ratchet in place. So, back where we were. Crank that right round and remove my film advance, my cocking rack. Let's just run this backwards. I'll just put the video on rewind. There's a ratchet that goes in here that stops the film advance gear from being able to revolve backwards. And unfortunately, while I was busy talking, I forgot to put it in place. We'll do that now. It's a standoff. The ratchet pull, and the spring and post are here together. It's not easy to get the spring on and off the post, so I usually put it aside as a pair. This is also awkward to get together because you're trying to get that post through two loose pieces and then screwed into the top cover. Inevitably it doesn't want to go. Let's try again. Yeah, success, success. Get that spring hooked behind here. That's better. That's better. Is the spring for this still in place? Yes, because I haven't tipped the body upside down. Let's get this piece in place. I'm bringing you a bit closer, I'm working too far away there, no one's seeing anything. Get that screw started. What's that sticking on there? A bit of grease. That screw is busy trying to hide round the back, we don't want that there. Where's that spring? And the screw, the shoulder screw. And this screw, which I have to get down into that hole down in there. Of course it didn't fall in the hole. One day I'll make a wonderful tool to hold that screw so it goes in smoothly, but today's not going to be the day. And I think from memory that screw is it brass? Could be. Here it is, it's lined up with the hole. Okay. Get the 3 screws done up tight. Get the spring here hooked behind there. Put the gear on the top. And that piece. Right, so we're sitting there neutral, there's absolutely no tension on that film advance. So I'm going to advance that one full turn. Put the lever in place, press down that tab, swing that 90 degrees, take my cocking rack, slip that in there, swing this right round to the end of its normal stroke and slightly beyond, allows me to slide that rack in place. And I'm checking where it's sitting. One more notch I think. Yeah, that'll do nicely. And here we are, we're back where we were a minute or two ago before I realised I hadn't done something correctly. And I'm looking for the shutter release components now. I want that. We'll have the shutter release button itself. The collar that goes over the shutter release button, and that's very important. You can get into a lot of trouble if you don't have that there. We've got the return spring, and we're not done yet because somewhere here I've got this, which is a spacer off the bottom of the shutter release shaft. I've got to get that down inside the camera over the shaft in here. Entertaining to say the least. And to make sure there's no moisture in there at all. These parts have been through the cleaner, of course. I'll lubricate this with a bit of molybdenum paste. Lubricate the spots in the body that passes through with a bit of molybdenum paste. Now here I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use a little touch of molybdenum paste on the end to glue that washer in position while I'm sliding this shaft down into position. Because otherwise I'll never get that washer in place. This little collar, I'll put a smear of grease on that sits on there. The spring sits on here. I've got to lower this down through the holes in the top of the body here without losing my washer and line it up with the shaft for the shutter release down in the body. And that went well because I achieved it on the first attempt That's very good. So the shutter release is all in place. This is set here at the moment in about the 90-degree position. At the end of the stroke, you hear a click. This pops up the other ratchet. I can roll this back to the rest position. If I press the shutter release, you'll see it presses down this tab, taking it down to the other cam, allowing me to move the film advance forward, and so on. So the camera body is fairly complete at that point, but it needs the rangefinder cleaned and put back in place. This rangefinder, let's have it apart. First I'll just stretch out the spring and remove that pin. A single screw here holds the arm onto the rangefinder. That one I'd already loosened, and they're usually a bit of a fight. Plain washer, wavy washer. If the wavy washer is too flat, the arm on the rangefinder will tend to flap about. If it flaps about a bit, you'll find that your vertical alignment tends to shift. I'm just going to mark this. That bush is almost certainly completely circular, but because it's got a slot in it, chances are it acts a little bit like an eccentric. So I put it back in exactly the same position. The chances are things will be in a useful place when I put them back together. That's the arm. Here's the body of the rangefinder. Let's have a look at this. Well, the prism on the end. On the Retina IIa, that prism is covered with black paint there. There may or may not be silver under that black paint. There probably is. But regardless, you do not want to damage it. So take care. Don't be wiping at that back surface with anything in the way of a solvent. The results might not be good. This shield on the front, because I'm going to clean this in the ultrasonic cleaner, I know that the paint would come off that very quickly if I put that in the cleaner, so that's coming off. And the eyepiece at the back here, I want that off. Oh, that screws tight. It's important when dealing with screws to apply lots and lots of downward pressure with your screwdriver so that the screwdriver doesn't cam out of the slot and damage anything. Right, so that's my rangefinder all in pieces. This I'm going to clean in the ultrasonic cleaner, but first of all I'm just going to clean this surface with a bit of naphtha to remove any grease, because I don't want to be transferring oils and greases to the soapy solution I'll be cleaning it in, because I don't want anything settling on the glass. Now here I can see that the glass is quite dirty. Most of that is on this surface. This surface is the front surface. That's plain glass. You could clean that with a cotton bud without any problems at all. But I can see that there's particles of dust on there. There's a haze cloud around some of those particles of dust, might mean that's mildew. The inner surface is not quite so dirty. That's the silvered surface. I'm going to clean this in the ultrasonic cleaner. I'm not going to poke and prod at that with anything. I do not want to damage that silver surface. Right, everything's back from the ultrasonic cleaner. Well, when I say everything, this body's back from the ultrasonic cleaner. The glass is nice and clean. It's cleaned it in a glass with a few drops of ordinary domestic dishwashing detergent in warm water. Just making sure that this is sitting square, that it's not overhanging any edges. and once it was cleaned in the ultrasonic cleaner, rinsed it under the hot water tap, used the puffer to blow out all and every bit of moisture, dried it with a hairdryer using the puffer as I went so that any droplets didn't settle and dry on the glass surfaces, otherwise they leave coffee rings, or something very like coffee rings, you know what I mean. Alright, so I'm just trying my best to pick up the rear, the eyepiece. Now the convex side goes inwards. To the back here it's virtually flat. I think it's actually slightly concave, but for practical purposes you can consider the outside surface here flat. And the prism, I've cleaned both surfaces of the prism, the one you can see here and the one up inside the tube, with domestic glass cleaner on the end of a cotton bud. I'll get that prism very roughly square with the front of the rangefinder body, just by adjusting the relative position of the two screws. A little bit more. That's a good start position then, because adjusting these two screws adjusts your vertical alignment. That looks good. There's the body of the rangefinder. Let's pop that to one side. Here's the arm. I'll just clean those surfaces with a bit of naphtha. I've already cleaned the glass on this. Just want to clean that surface, that surface. You can see there's a slight bit of grease on that, very little. The other components I have clean. The spring, the return spring here just fell off. It can't have been hooked on very well. See if I can hook that on there a little bit better. Well, one end of the spring's fairly well closed up, so I'll hook that one, and this one here is quite open. That spring's been bent. Not sure how that would have happened. Presumably during installation. What I want to do is get this spring hooked into that little tiny hole. I'm using two pairs of tweezers to try and get the end of that spring in there. Oh, nearly. That spring is all but there. Got to rotate that down a bit. Get it to line up with that hole. Why won't that go down? That's it. Now, a bit of molybdenum paste. Normally I'll put a wipe through here and a wipe on that surface, and I don't use much. Now our bush, our brass bush, I think it's brass rather than bronze. Either one would do well in that situation. I'm just lining it up with that scribe mark I'd put on there with the tip of a screwdriver. That just sits on there like that, and I will wipe some molybdenum paste in a few spots around the outside there, And my wavy washer, I'm looking at that, that's very flat. As I said, if it's very flat, you may end up with the vertical alignment being a bit haphazard. When you look at it, sometimes it'll be good and other times it'll be different. So I'm just putting a bit more tension on that wavy washer. So it tends to hold the arm from flapping about. Just checking that moves freely, tighten that screw up, that all appears good, and the arm is most certainly not flapping about. Now the pin that goes through the spring, I'll put that through the loop of the spring, pull the spring back into position, just checking that that arm moves freely. If it doesn't, give it a bit of a wiggle, it might seat that the wavy washer and you'll find that it moves freely. That's good. That's ready to go on the camera body, which I'll do now, I think. Here's the camera body. Let's just zoom out a bit so everybody's in the picture. To stop this moving on the casting, which it is prone to do if the camera gets a serious thump, I normally put a couple of spots of lacquer on there so that once it's screwed down, it's not enthusiastic about shifting. It doesn't take much. And that is just cheap nail varnish from the $2 shop, if that's you know, the sort of place I mean. Now making sure this is in place and that the arm is behind that, well, the arm here is in front of that screw head, not sitting on top of it. If it sits on top of it, you can bend the arm when you do your screws up. It's always worth making sure that the focus is in the infinity position so that that screw is as far back as it is likely to be. That screw didn't drop down where I wanted it to. Let's see if the second one's any better. Lining up the hole, drop the screw from a great height, it immediately falls into the hole and I can run my screwdriver down there and tighten it up. Now I'll just get that first screw back out. Now I was holding my thumb carefully over that shutter release at the time so it didn't fall off the camera and cause me bother. Nope. That screw managed to tumble on the way down, it was upside down. Let's try it again. That was better. Get that screw started. Now I'm holding the rangefinder body back with my finger, pressing it towards the back of the camera, keeping it nice and square hard against both of those screws so that the rangefinder is square with the body. I'll do those two screws up tight, check that everything moves, rangefinder moves freely, and I can check the alignment by looking out the window. I can see that my vertical alignment is a bit out, the moving image is too high, so I'm going to slacken the front screw slightly, tighten the rear screw slightly, check again. Now my moving image is too low, slacken the rear screw, tighten the front screw. See how I did? Well, that's pretty good. But my horizontal alignment's not wonderful. That's hardly surprising. I did have to adjust this arm here on the front, and that certainly would have shifted things. So let me close the front of the camera and see what that rangefinder looks like in the rest position. It's certainly coming back past infinity. That means this screw here needs to be tightened up slightly so that the images don't go back beyond the infinity position. That's pointless. That's nearly right. That screw is almost always very tight. It's never easy to turn. Here's that. Oh, that's spot on. Okay, now I'm going to check my adjustment. And it needs to be tightened up. It doesn't lift off the infinity position quickly enough. That's the lock screw. And this is the adjustment screw. Let's try that. It needs a bit more. The adjustments are always very subtle. You will go from not quite enough one way to too far just by looking at it. It can be very frustrating getting this correct. But what you want to achieve is that the images align perfectly at an infinity target when just as the focus scale ring comes around to the infinity position, the images converge completely. And as soon as you move your focus scale ring slightly, you should see the images start to diverge. Then you've got it set correctly for the infinity position. Correct adjustment for close-ups, you can check that. There's usually very little need to go around and do an extra adjustment. I'll check this now. You adjust close distances by changing the angle of the end here. There's a cam surface under here, and by shifting the angle of that, you shift the position of the cam. It changes the effective rate at which the arm moves relative to the movement of the focus scale ring. It's very fiddly. As soon as you touch that adjustment, you'll have knocked out the infinity adjustment, so you're working backwards and forwards between two adjustments. It's very tiresome. Generally speaking, you don't need to touch it. I'm just going to check my close focus adjustment now and see if it's any good. Presuming if it is, I'm done here. I'm pretty sure I've got the counter assembled correctly. It fell to bits as I was putting it in place, and it may be 180 degrees out, and I'll find out shortly. The video camera had stopped recording by the time I got to that stage, and I do not know. It feels like it's probably okay. I do not know at what point it stopped recording, unfortunately, so I do not know how much I've missed. I'm just checking this. The frame counter moves nicely. Let's get that round near number 1 and see if it locks there. Yes, it's locking at number 1. So it is correctly assembled. I'm just going to slacken the screw off very slightly. Swing this disc around at the top anti-clockwise. And that should line up the numbers pretty well. I'll see if I can get that better than that. You've got a little bit of adjustment. Yeah, it just needs to be round further than that. That's it. That's marvellous. That's just as it should be. Just wipe the top off there since I've got greasy fingerprints all over it. So our frame counter's good. Shutter release appears to be good. The rewind here. Let's put this together. That spacer goes on the top. The screw. Let's see. So here we've got the rewind knob. And the centre piece, which is our film reminder pointer. The wavy washer goes on that thing, sits around the centre. That can go on the top. Got the screw on my special driver. And that special driver is a piece of brass with 2 holes drilled in it and 2 pieces of spring wire in there, piano wire. Exactly the right size for the holes in that knob. So that's tightened up. I can put that in here. Spin that down. Tighten up the rewind. Check that that moves. It does. Good 2-stage action there. Here's the camera body. That's back together. And we have a nice tripod surround on there now, which we were sadly lacking earlier. Let's remove that fingerprint from the glass. Pop this to one side. I really do need to do the shutter.